Hi guys, bringing you a video today on the Royal Navy's post-war working uniform, action working dress, formerly the number 8 uniform, and changed to, and I think still currently, number 4 uniform with the new personal clothing system, which goes beyond the scope of what we're going to look at in this video. But here we have the shirt from the first sort of standard issue number 8 action working dress uniform. I'll be looking at the shirts and I'll be looking at the trousers separately. The date ranges given in this video are a little bit sketchy in some areas because obviously items of clothing, working dress in particular, were replaced on a wastage basis. So as the uniform became worn out, it would then be replaced. So when new items came in, they wouldn't necessarily immediately replace the uniform that was already in use. So there would be a crossover period, and we'll try and work that out a little bit in the video. Also, some of the actual introduction dates of the different patterns of shirt and trousers and so on, I'm not entirely sure of. I can give you a rough estimate based upon footage and photographs I've seen. So that's the sort of, this video is not precise on dates in that sort of way, but gives date ranges. But this shirt is of a pattern. The number 8, the action working dress uniform, had first been intended to be introduced before the start of the Second World War, but it didn't actually make an appearance until very late in the war in a trials form, and then obviously was used after the war. And you can see here, for anyone who's familiar with the United States Navy's working dress uniform with a chambray shirt used during the Second World War, there's some influence on that here with the plain button-through patch pockets on the chest here. There is a little label here, but it's not particularly clear. It just gives the sizing there. If you'd be able to read that, size 2. But this is the first standard pattern of shirt. It differed slightly from the trial example, just in the spacing of the buttons. It's made of cotton drill, a blue cotton drill, and this was the first standard issue pattern issued from around, well, after 1945, after the trials, through into the, you see this in use through the early 50s to the mid 50s. So here's a little bit of footage from the 1950s, the early 1950s, showing this pattern of shirt in use, being worn. Here we have the next pattern of shirt, which is very similar, same material, same basic cut as the previous pattern we've just looked at. Introduced from the early to mid 50s, around there, looking at photographs and footage. The major difference, as you can probably already see, is the pockets are no longer just plain button-through patch pockets. You have a pleated breast pocket with a concealed button on the flap there, as you can see. I'll just unfold this now to have a look at. You can see the rest of the design is the same. It's a little bit discoloured, this one, unfortunately, but the label's still nice and clear. We'll look at that in a second. You see two breast pockets have just been changed to this design, with a concealed button flap and having the pleat in the pocket, so you can carry a bit more in there. It's a bit more secure when you do. And then you can see the label here. If I get that up to the light there. There we go. Hopefully it's focusing all right on that. Shirt, AWD, action working dress, Follett, Belfast, size 2, and you can see the date there, 1955, at the bottom there. So there we go, that's the second pattern of action working dress shirt. And here's a short clip from the late 1950s showing this pattern of shirt in use. Here we have the third pattern of action working dress shirt. Again, just a slight progression in design. The pockets no longer have the concealed button. It's still the pleated breast pocket, but it no longer has the concealed button. It's just a button-through flap. This one's unusual, and I've put it in here just to show you an example. Interesting, not only Royal Navy ratings, but also Royal Marines working aboard ship were provided with action working dress around the time that this was in use. These first appear, there is a photograph of one in the 1965 uniform regulations, and they were certainly in use late 60s into the 70s, And if I unfold this here, you'll see what's unusual about it. The Royal Marines use these, but also the Army used them as well, interestingly. This has had the tails removed. The cut would otherwise be exactly the same with longer tails. It's had the tails removed. It's been short-sleeved, and there are sergeant stripes applied. Now these, the first thought might immediately be Royal Marines. This has in fact been used by the Royal Corps of Transport fleet, who wore number 8 uniform aboard ship, and they operated their own landing craft and so on. And what's missing insignia wise is this oblong here. I don't know if you can see clearly in the camera there. If I get the light on, there's the patch here of less faded cloth and stitching holes where a badge has been, and that would have been the small Royal Corps of Transport or RASC fleet prior to that. Ensign badge, the formation badge, was a blue ensign with crossed swords, and also their ensign that they flew at sea as well. So there it is. It is a Royal Navy issue action working dress shirt. You can see there, shirt AWD, and you have a contract number here. Ackroyd and Sons Limited, and obviously now have a NATO stock code there as well. But this has been used by the Army, by Royal Corps of Transport Fleet, and hence the sergeant stripes there. So that's the third pattern of action working dress shirt. Okay, what we have here is the fourth pattern. Not really a separate pattern per se, but it is the third pattern made that now, instead of being made in the drill, the light blue drill material, which all the others have been made of, the cotton drill, this is now made of polycotton. And from what I can make out, obviously the pattern doesn't change, so it's a little difficult to tell from photographs, but from what I can make out, these were in use from the early to mid 70s onwards. And it's simply the same, obviously the button through flap on the pocket there, still a pleated breast pocket, but made in lighter polycotton material, which I think was probably done to cut costs, I'd imagine. Cheaper to make something out of polycotton than it is out of pure cotton. So there it is. That's exactly the same pattern of shirt, just made in polycotton material. And you can see here again the label in the collar here. If we bring it over there, shirt blue polyester cotton unmarked, and you'll see the same terminology is used on the trousers of this period as well when we get to those. The polyester cotton unmarked, that is, and you can see again there's NATO stock number and the contract number underneath, and obviously instructions given that it's polycotton, and you have to treat it rather differently. So that there's the third pattern made in polycotton, which all these pattern designations I'm just using to run through these. They're not official by any means as far as I'm aware. But this is what I would consider the fourth pattern, because it's now made in polycotton, and we'll put that to one side and have a look at the fourth pattern, the fifth type, sorry, in just a second. Here's another piece of footage from the 1970s showing this pattern of shirt in use. Okay, so here we have the fifth pattern, and we're getting a bit closer to what sort of the modern GS shirt the Army used, the 1972 pattern the RAF used, and the more modern action working dress uniform the Royal Navy used. This is an intermediate design between the earlier shirts, which didn't have epaulets, and obviously the large pockets on the breast, to more of what would be recognised as a normal work shirt. Obviously no pleats in the pocket now, much smaller normal style shirt buttons. Obviously you have a name tape added on here, which was quite common to do by this time period. I believe these were introduced late 70s, mid to late 70s, probably more late 70s, but you do see these seem to be the primary number 8 shirt being worn in the Falklands in 1982, where of course the polycotton construction of both shirt and trousers that were in use at the time caused serious issues because of their lack of fire resistance, and clothing melting onto men's bodies when exposed to fire, which is was a lesson that was learned, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. The result of that and the change in the uniform that it brought. But these certainly are shown right into the mid-80s, and in the mid-80s a change was made due to experience garnered in the Falklands War. Just spread this out so you can have a look. Unfortunately the epaulette buttons are missing. But this coincided with the introduction of rank slides as well. So for ratings, that is, there had previously been rank slides prior to the late 70s, I understand, for use on foul weather clothing. Very late 70s, early 80s, rank slides were introduced for shoulder rank 4 ratings to wear on shirts and the woolen pullover, which have of course also been introduced in the 1970s, the navy blue version of the jersey heavy wool. But yes, so this is the very late 70s to mid 80s sort of issue shirt. There you do see some of the earlier polycotton pleated pocket type being worn into the early 80s as well. So yeah, that's the fifth pattern, as I would say, and we'll move on and have a look at the final pattern of Action Working Dress shirt before the change to PCS in just a moment. And here we have some footage from the 1980s of this pattern of shirt being worn. Okay, here we have the last pattern of shirt we're going to be looking at. This is a pattern introduced in the mid 1980s, post Falklands, and worn right up until the introduction of PCS in, I think, 2015, with very little change. Obviously the darker buttons mark it out from the previous pattern. It's a slightly darker blue colour, and these are very, very common on the surplus market, worn as, sold for wear as working shirts and things like this, obviously because they're still surplus, as opposed to being historically interesting at all, really. But include it here for completeness. I don't know if you'll be able to read on the label there, but the contract number is SL32B stroke 28 something, so it's mid to late 1980s, around 1987, somewhere there. You can see on the warning label here, I don't know if you'll be able to read this because it's a bit creased up. Try and flatten it out a bit more. There we go. It's basically warns against contamination with oil, and obviously warns to launder these shirts properly. They are made of polyester cotton, but they are fire resistant. They have a fire resistant coating on them, and obviously this can be damaged by oil or improper laundering, and the label warns about that. Very simple patch pockets on the front with a single button flap. Epaulettes, very similar to the previous polyester cotton shirt, but obviously now fire resistant, made in slightly different material, slightly different colour, darker buttons, otherwise very similar. And as I say, worn right through to the mid 2010s. So yeah, that's the final pattern of Action Working Dress shirt. And here we have a short clip of this final pattern of shirt being worn soon after it was introduced in the 1980s. Okay, so moving on to trousers. Here we have the first pattern of Action Working Dress trousers, which are just a plain pair of blue trousers with pockets in the side seams. There you can see one each side, and there's also a single back button through back pocket, which in this instance uses a small metal button of the dish type used on early battle dress, actually, though not made in brass, made in I think originally chrome steel or stainless steel, but it has rusted. Double buckle fastening at the waist, similar to Second World War tropical clothing, and obviously metal buttons down the fly there as well. It's a button fly, but you can see here the double buckle, double strap, as used on Royal Navy tropical uniform and Army tropical uniform during the Second World War. And this is in fact when I purchased these, they came with this label. If we look here, we can see Admiralty pattern, and you have 14th of the 3rd, 49, I believe. Working dress for ratings, trousers, PTO. And if we turn over, size 9, 34-inch waist, yardage, it gives you a yardage measurement there, and the measurements for the trousers. So this is a working pattern, an Admiralty working pattern, although it isn't a sealed pattern. And then if we look in here, somewhere in here, I forget where, it's in the end of the trouser leg, the back of the trouser leg here, you can see the actual manufacturer's label, which gives no real inkling that this is a naval contracted item, but obviously the size stamp there, just a tacked on paper label there that's still present, which is nice. So yeah, just literally just a plain pair of blue trousers with, you can see the belt loops here, which will allow you to fit a money belt, the Royal Navy money belt, to wear as a trouser belt there. So yeah, as I say, the waist fastening, I'll just show a slight variation on that here. The waist fastening copied off tropical clothing at the time. These are another example here that have plain, the other one had sliding buckles. These are just plain chromed buckles, and this pair have plastic, still have the back pocket here, button through back pocket there, but now have plastic, small black battle dress type plastic buttons on the crotch, on the fly rather, and on the back pocket. Otherwise identical pattern, and made in this sort of heavy blue cotton material. I don't know if that's sateen, the weave of it, but quite heavy duty, quite thick. So that's those two there are examples of the first pattern trousers that we used with this working uniform. And we'll move on now and have a look at the second pattern. So here we have a pair of the second pattern action working dress trousers. Again, my use of the term second pattern is simply to differentiate them. I think they were just always referred to as action working dress trousers. I can't find any information suggesting that the pattern change had any change on nomenclature at all. Again, following design changes in tropical clothing, which had obviously influenced the waist fastening on the previous type with a double buckle at the front of the waist. These actually have a crossover belt system similar to that used on the 1950 pattern jungle trousers, where the waist has two belts that cross over. You can see here there's a small slot, so when you close the waist, this belt goes inside, comes through that slot and buckles to this buckle here, like that, and the other one goes around this side to this buckle around here, and that's how you close the waist, which gives you it gives you adjustment to the waist without having separate side adjusters. I can get that through there just to show you, and that's the waist done up, which gives you a lot of variability in the waistband. It's awkward. I don't quite know why it was copied for these trousers. Side adjusters were introduced later on, as we'll see shortly, and a lot simpler way of doing things, but it's what was done. And this is the small buckles used at the waist on the previous pattern. The small non-sliding single buckle, and you see that actually buttoned on there to the waist. Otherwise, a very similar design. Nice big belt loops, so you can fit a money belt around the waist. Plastic buttons down the fly, and we have do believe we have a single button through back pocket. So the overall design of the trousers, with your two hip pockets there, the same, just the waist fastening closes. And I believe these were introduced in the 1950s. I want to say mid-1950s, I'm not entirely sure. And you certainly see them being worn through into the 1970s. So they don't change along with the shirt. The shirt changed more than the trousers did, if you will, and at different times. And again, it's more difficult to see in photographs what the trousers are like, because often the waist is hidden by a waist belt or the shirt bloused over or various other things. But from what I can work out, those are the rough date range of when these were in use, this particular pattern. So we'll put these to one side now. We'll have a look at the next pattern. So we move on now to the dreaded polycotton. These are a pair of 1970s action working dress trousers, I know from the contract number. And these were certainly introduced in the 70s along with the polycotton shirt, which we've already looked at. Not exactly sure when date-wise, but in the 70s. And obviously used through the Falklands War and into the mid-80s. But suffered caused exactly the same problems that the polycotton shirt did in firefighting situations and generally in fire situations where men were exposed to fire. The design has also changed, as you can see here. The waist, there's now a double button closure there and a single button at the fly, so it doubles over the waistband there, and you can button that end down with 2 buttons, and there's another single button there, reverse button on the fly to button through, and then the fly has these small black plastic buttons down the fly there. Single back pocket button through again. There isn't one on the other side, but that remains the same. Again, they're just a plain pair of blue trousers, otherwise made in this polycotton material. You can see here you now have side adjusters, which are adjusted not with the 2 adjustment points, and that's determined by which button you have the little strap buttoned onto. You can possibly see there. I'm afraid the light's going a little bit. It's very dull today. I'm doing my best in the poor conditions. We might pause after this or the next pair, and depends how the light goes, and we might carry on another day, get this done another day. But that's the waist adjustment method has changed. And you see all the labelling here, like I was saying before. I can get this up to the camera here. Don't know how good the light's going to be on this. Trousers men's polyester cotton unmarked, which is the same nomenclature that the shirt of this period used, and you can see the pre-metric sizing there. And again, A78 CLO, can't read that, 42331 I think contract number, which is the 70s contract number, just pre-Falklands, I think late 70s. So these are the trousers worn during that era. So yeah, so that's the third pattern of trousers, which are just a mess now. I have to fold all this stuff up again when I'm done. But yeah, so there we are. So I'll move on to the 4th pattern that I've identified here. Again, all this sort of pattern stuff is not official. It's just something I'm using to differentiate them for the purpose of the video. So I'll put these to one side and we'll have a look at the other pair. Okay, so here we have the 4th pattern of action working dress trousers. These were introduced, well, I assume mid-80s after the Falklands. The contract number on these dates them to about 1984. Again, you've got the button through back pocket here, though there is now a little loop for the button. It doesn't just button through the flap, so you have a little cotton loop there on the top part of the pocket to close that. The side adjusters are no longer button, no longer adjusted by having 2 buttons. It is just a buckle and a pull strap, so you can just pull the waist tight. And you've lost the double button and single button fastening at the waistband there. You now have these hooks, which is quite a familiar way of fastening. These are what I was familiar with from being a cadet. And then just the plain small black plastic buttons down the fly there. The most important thing about these is when we look at the label, and the label now reads, back to cotton, trousers men's working dress RN, cotton FR, which means fire resistant. So that's the lesson learned from the Falklands, is the introduction of fire resistant clothing, which is a lesson that shouldn't really have had to be learned in the way it was, but there we are. And as I say, the contract number CT4A1334 dates these to around 1984. So yeah, in the immediate post-Falklands period. So these are the ones worn from, I imagine these were introduced fairly quickly because of their fire resistant properties. Okay, here we have the penultimate pattern of action working dress trousers. I'll say pattern, they're exactly the same pattern as the cotton ones we've just looked at, but now made in polyester cotton. Still fire resistant, however. As you can see, exactly the same design of side adjusters there, side pockets, single back pocket there, and then if we look at the label in here, you can see trousers men's working dress RN, cotton and polyester FR, which is fire resistant obviously, and then we have the contract number there, SL33A9874, which dates these to the 1990s, although I believe these were introduced in the late 80s. Same waist fastener with the 2 hooks there, and again just a plain pair of blue trousers really. And these are still available surplus to purchase for, obviously they're popular as working trousers and things like this because they're quite tough, quite hard wearing. So there they are, and I say we'll have a quick look at the next the last pair of trousers now. Okay, so here we have the final variety of action working dress trousers before the move to PCS in, I think, 2015 was the changeover to personal clothing system, which again isn't a set date. Action working dress took a little while to transition over, but that's the date of when transition started. These are a departure from previous designs, which were basically just plain trousers with two hip pockets and a back pocket, no matter the waist closure changed and the material they were made from. These are, as I said before, more of a cargo type trouser, combat type trouser. You have a pleated, velcroed leg pocket on each side. And these aren't part of my collection, these are just a pair of working trousers I have, surplus. But for completion's sake, I thought I might as well look at them. I have the shirt to go with them, so might as well put them in the video and extend the date range a little bit. And you can see one on this side as well, so a pocket on each leg. The back pocket is no longer just a slip pocket with the pocket internal, it's a patch pocket, so it's sewn on the outside. And you can see the change over to the Soldier 95 type loop, fabric loop plastic buttons, which are copied off a Canadian design, going a bit further back. That's another story in itself. The side adjusters are a button with the simple tab, much in the way of combat trousers, but you have the combat type draw cord inside, the sort of mesh fabric draw cord, which you get inside all of the Soldier 95 and the indeed earlier the tropical combat trousers and things like that. So the 1985 pattern, I think, has the waist adjuster as well of army combat trousers, so that's derived from that. And you can see on the label here, trousers, action working dress, RN, fire resistant. So say they're still referred to as action working dress, and these were, I don't know when they were introduced into use. I want to say late 90s, early 2000s, perhaps, maybe a little bit earlier than that. Perhaps someone who knows or can roughly remember when, and is willing to sort of satisfy my nerdiness on that point might make a comment on the video and let me know. But yeah, so the sort of the departure from the previous designs and something a bit more like a pair of combat trousers, but still made in a dark blue material and worn with the final pattern of shirt which I showed previously, the fire resistant shirt, which was manufactured right the way through this period. And I say the trousers and the shirt changed at a different rate, so the uniform didn't change stage to stage. It was very much, oh, we'll introduce a new shirt, we'll introduce a new pair of trousers, and so forth. So there it is, and that's pretty much the story up to the introduction of personal clothing system, which is obviously what's been adopted by all three services now in different colours for their different uses. But I hope you found that interesting, and until next time, bye for now.